First up, to get our reactions, we have Steve Swart from the ACDP, who seems to be a bit impressed with how the finance minister did. What exactly is it that impressed you, Steve?
Well, what was particularly impressive was that the budget deficit came in very slightly lower than was forecast at the beginning of the year. And this is good news. We were expecting, in the light of the global economic crisis and the domestic economic crisis, that the budget deficit would be higher. But it's come at 4.8%, which is to be welcomed because this has a positive impact on the debt of government going forward. The Minister made it very clear that our debt consolidation package is on course, and this sends a very strong message to investors and credit ratings agencies.
The reprioritization and expenditure, how's that for you?
Well, that is also to be welcomed because there is not an increase in government expenditure beyond what was announced in February. The Minister made it very clear that there will only be a reprioritization of funds, and that he will be addressing corruption and irregular and wasteful expenditure to make sure that there is not an increase in government expenditure. That the ACDP welcomes.
Steve, thank you very much. That's Steve Swart from the ACDP.
Sir, good afternoon, and thanks so very much for joining us. Tell us your overall impression of the Minister's speech.
Yes. Well, the deficit is up and the growth rate is down. That means all the indicators are moving in the wrong direction. Surely, if that was a patient, the alarm bells will go off and we need urgent action. And I do think the Minister did try. I think he's brave in some of the things that he did, stopping waste, not trying to get more taxes, but really stopping the departments, the government, of spending more. Die groot vraag is of hy gaan slaag om die mors van geld te beperk, om kontrakte beter te beheer, want hy het al die maatreëls aangekondig. Ons sal hom daaraan baie sterk ondersteun om eerder daai kant vas te vat as om die belastingbetaler swaar te laat kry.
What kind of support do you think you can lend to the Minister for him to try and achieve his objectives?
Well, just the way I react at the moment to say, surely this is the benefit of South Africa. I was nervous that the ANC priorities might be more important than South Africa's priorities in this election year for them. And I think he said, no, South Africa is number first. We must save the economy because we're moving in the wrong direction. If we can support him, we are a bit negative that in the past these measures did not work and that spending just continued to spiral out of control. And he said, we're not going to do that. Let's help him to stop that in the budgets, in the parliament and in the committees. We'll do that, yeah.
All right, and then just finally, your overall impression then, are you satisfied?
Well, it's a difficult one. We'll have to see. I think, as I said, he was brave in doing what he did. And broadly, I'm satisfied that he's realistic. I was worried that he will not be realistic about this situation in South Africa because we are in trouble. If the numbers go down, what he predicted, none of those numbers really came through. And that is realistic that he accept that, and he said we must do something about that.
All right. Dr. Mulder, thank you, sir, for your time.
Thank you very much.
Gunther, that was Dr. Peter Mulder, who's the leader of the Freedom Front Plus.
Nick Koronov from COPE to talk to us a bit. Nick, do you think that your idea of discipline in the fiscus has gotten through to the finance minister?
Well, absolutely yes. I think there was a little bit of expediency since 2008. He has clearly hit the brakes today and restore fiscal discipline, and we're happy about that. That will also assist a little bit in restoring business confidence, and that's exactly what we needed this time.
What's your idea on how the minister's panned out spending, reprioritizing public expenditure?
Well, you know, it is the importance of that is that they will go now to every department, reprioritize and make sure that they cut programs that's not necessary, defer where they don't need certain programs, and save where they can save. If they're not going to do that, if the departments and the provinces and local municipality and all the cabinet colleagues not going to support Pravin Gordhan on his statement today, we are in trouble.
Mr. Koronov, thank you very much. That's Nick Koronov from the Congress of the People.
Deputy Secretary General of the United Democratic Movement. Mr. Nkwankwa, thank you very much for joining us, and thanks for your time. Your overall impression, sir, of the budget delivered by the Minister a few minutes ago?
Well, I think the first thing that we need to talk about is that we're very happy about the fact that the Minister has managed to keep a healthy fiscal framework under very difficult circumstances. But we want to caution that that's going to be very difficult to sustain if the department still allows government departments to actually waste money, 5 billion rands, on entertainment, and when it allows departments to actually divert resources that are intended for something else into private individuals' projects. The other issue that's very important is the decision to increase or expand trade with Africa and into Africa, because in the past we've been very good at exporting principles of democracy and good governance to Africa without necessarily taking advantage of opportunities that arise, economic opportunities in particular. The other issue that's very important is that government has actually taken a decision to link cash flows to effective infrastructure delivery in provinces. That's very important. I think those steps are very critical. The other issue that's very important that we hold very dear as the United Democratic Movement is the issue and the focus on providing greater support to municipalities and rural municipalities in particular. Yes.
All right. And then, as a member of parliament, I mean, having listened to the minister, now, what responsibility will you then take as a member of parliament to say, look, we need to keep this government clean. We need to keep this government to the promises made by the minister today. What role do you think you can add in that regard?
I think the most important part that we can play is try to inculcate a culture where citizens are actually able to hold public reps accountable, and the government in particular accountable for the delivery of service to the people. We need to try to be more effective and mobilize structures so that we can help government rather than at times we want to always oppose. But I think it's important that we try to work with government because this is our country at the end of the day.
All right. Mr. Ngwangwa, thank you very much for your time, so we really do appreciate it.
Chairperson of the Finance Committee in Parliament, Mr. Thaba Mufamadi. Is Treasury still hitting the right notes when it comes to the ANC's priorities?
Of course, I am convinced that they are still within what our priorities are all about. Fighting crime, social spending, particularly on health and education. But most importantly, to continue to breathe new life into economic growth, infrastructure spending. Today's budget, what we're seeing is that one, we must do more with what we have. It's not an incremental budget. It's a budget that is almost what it was in February, but most importantly that there are savings that have been realized within that budget, and there's no compromise on infrastructure spending, which is very, very critical for both economic growth and social development in our country. So from where we're sitting, the budget still talks to our priorities and key manifesto priorities for that matter: health, education and crime fighting.
In the run-up to this mini-budget, there's been questions about leadership in government. Are you sure that Treasury is now given the right leadership when we're talking about the state of our economy?
I think what has emerged today is that the budget proposals before us into the next 3 years dispels that myth that there's no leadership or there's a leadership crisis in the country. We can see a government that has taken firm stand on what needs to happen, even including the issues of labor relations, how we should actually coordinate our efforts between all organs of civil society, labor, business, and government itself. And the issue of the mining industry, yes, of course, has dented investor confidence. We can't shy away from that. In fact, even the Secretary General or the General Secretary of COSATU has alluded to this fact, that we cannot continue to posture or create an image that suggests that we are a country in a crisis. And precisely because of that, leadership is a collective effort. It requires both government, labor and business. But on the issue of labor relations, it is more a matter between labor and business. If there's a leadership crisis, that crisis will be found within the two. We can only facilitate as government, and the ANC has been very, very much concerned. And to that extent, we've been engaging with the Tripartite Alliance to find a solution on this particular matter. And you can also remember that not long ago, the President convened a summit wherein a social compact was actually adopted, which begins to say what are the key critical areas that all of us must begin to focus on to give leadership in society.
Mr. Mufamadi, thank you very much for speaking to us. That's Mr. Thaba Mufamadi from the ANC.
I have got with me Mr. Mario Oriani Omresini from the Inkatha Freedom Party to give us his impressions of what he thought of the minister's budget speech. Sir, good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us. Your overall impressions of the budget, the mini-budget?
You see, the poor devil is doing the best he can within the paradigm in which he's operating. But the paradigm is not going to solve our problems. The paradigm is one of maintaining a non-sustainable welfare state, enriching people at the very, very top, and squeezing out of existence the people in the middle. That cannot work. All that he could deliver was a commitment not to increase expenditure, when in fact he should have decreased expenditure. In the meantime, people who are paying taxes are paying more direct taxes, more indirect taxes through increased price of electricity, increased price of food, and increased price of all the commodities and services we use because of the insular and closed characteristics of our marketplace.
Right. So basically what you're saying is that poor people once again have drawn the short end of this, the straw.
Well, it's not just the poor people, it's the economic formula that cannot work. We should have used, and we should use this crisis to bite the bullet, restructure, and begin producing products which are competitive on a worldwide basis. Instead, we are having government-funded growth. Government is placing on steroids segments of industry which are not viable in the long term, and we are going to get stuck with them after the recession, when the rest of the world will have geared up for a new season of international competitiveness, and we are going to be back to be a commodity country, losing the opportunity that we now have to do what is right. But the minister is not in the political position of challenging the paradigm within which he's operating.
All right. Mr. Ambrosini, thank you very much for your time, so we really do appreciate it.
Is he making the right noises about the state of our economy?
Well, I think the most important thing he needed to do today was show that he's prepared to undertake fiscal consolidation. And I think the spending freeze that he's imposed is something to be welcomed. I think we needed a measure like that to show that he still has control over the purse strings. But certainly there were some major disappointments. The first one is, I think the speech showed that the minister is in charge of the budget, but he's not in charge of policy. There was no mention of the youth wage subsidy. 2.5 years ago that was proposed in this House, and it's still up until now being blocked by COSATU. Plus there were other mentions made of other labour law reforms and regulatory reforms that he mentioned in February. Still no sign of them now. Whatever Treasury wants to do, particularly on the microeconomic policy space, they're currently being blocked, and that's a very bad thing for this country.
Talking about this new use it or lose it idea on spending, where infrastructure projects that are moving slowly, their funding will then be moved to faster moving projects. Do you think that's a good idea?
Absolutely. We support the Minister's initiative there. We support his crackdown on wasteful expenditure. But frankly, the wasteful expenditure we've calculated as the DA, that across the government departments last year there was 6.7 billion rand of wasteful expenditure. So clearly it's out of control in government. We hope the Minister's plan works, but the proof of the pudding will be if the departments adopt this and stop spending wastefully.
Tim, we have to leave it there for now. Thank you very much. That's Tim Harris, the DA's finance spokesperson.